Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Govs on the Go Faculty Spotlight, a podcast featuring faculty in the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the Dean of the college. I also get to serve as the host of the podcast. Today I'm talking with Rob Barron, Professor and Chairperson in the Department of Communication here at Austin Peay. Rob, so glad that you agreed to be on the podcast today.
Well, you know, when no one else is willing to do it, I figured I'd jump on that grenade, as it were. So here I am.
Well, it's part of what we're trying to do is shine some light on all the things. You are a faculty member here.
I am.
And as a chairperson, you have a special responsibility.
I do.
Besides spending time talking to the dean for quite some time, which our sessions are legendary. We're going to try to focus just on you, not so much on me today.
Okay, all right.
How's that?
We can do that.
Okay, so let's begin with the fact that you are a Minnesotan native.
I am.
And so, but how did you come to Austin Peay?
So it all started when I was in high school. I started doing high school speech and debate, and did that from when I was a sophomore all the way through senior, and then went to college. So when I went to college, I knew I wanted to study communication, knew that was what I was interested in. But I was also the first person in my family to graduate college. Okay. And so I didn't necessarily have that whole preparation of what do you do once you're in college to move on to that next stage. And so after college, I was doing some odd jobs. I was coaching high school speech and debate because I maintained that connection all throughout. And then came back, was coaching, and it was really, it's interesting, a community college person who was also coaching speech and debate, actually the spouse of one of the other coaches on the team that I was coaching for. His name was Mike Wortman. He just retired a few years ago from Normandale Community College up in Minneapolis, suggested that I should go and get a master's degree, and that might be something that I could do to move my career forward and get out of the kind of 9 to 5 jobs that I was working. And of course, I, as someone who was the first person in my family to graduate college, was like, well, what's a master's degree? what does that mean?
Right.
And so I went. My wife and I were living in Minneapolis, or technically St. Paul, or a suburb, in the area. I went to the University of Minnesota, got a master's degree. As I was finishing that up, I had the opportunity to go into a brand new newly created program at the University of Minnesota in writing studies. They were doing a bunch of strategic realignment to bring a bunch of programs together. And that new program started up. I was part of that first cohort. And just through that, I got involved. I was teaching. Austin Peay State University was hiring, and that's what brought me here. So, the thing that I've told students that are interested in the academic job market, it really is about going where the jobs are. The job was at Austin Peay, and that's what brought me here. They were looking for a social media specialist, and that's what, in part, what I am.
Well, and we're certainly glad you're here, and I'm sure you missed the snow.
I do. Although we had more snow down here than we had in Minnesota this past winter, so I know. My dad was golfing in January, and that's unheard of in Minnesota. So.
Well, and part of what I appreciate for what you bring to the role of chairperson is that perspective of being able to communicate to our students about all the different avenues that a degree in communications can do for them.
Sure.
Can you kind of, explain a little bit about all the tools that a student has when they leave your program?
Sure. So we are a very focused, practical program. So certainly every program in the humanities will teach you things about critical thinking, creativity, working in a group, but really focus on kind of what I like to call career readiness. So we're focused on students that are getting ready to go out and have careers in professional communication or the media, that are working to develop those specific skill sets. If they're going to be a professional, a public relations practitioner or a corporate communications specialist at an organization or business, they're going to be taught those skills, writing, speaking, developing content for an audience. If they're doing video production, they're going to get that hands-on experience. I mean, we've got students here right now in the studio doing that hands-on practical skills. And so that's something we really tried to instill in our students that, we'll teach you all of those things that humanities teach all of our students. How do you actually be creative and think and work critically with groups, but also here's some practical skills that you can take out into the real world and hopefully find some gainful employment once all is said and done.
Because people love our communication majors.
They do. Well, and it's funny. I mean, our communication majors are in high demand, even on campus here.
They are.
I have met so many alumni here at Austin Peay who are alumni of our program and are now working here. So I think you walk over to the PR office here on campus, and you've got a number of students who have come through either our bachelor's program or our master's program that are now doing great things for the university because of what they learned through us here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you study. Now,
Okay.
you identify yourself as a digital rhetorician.
I do.
So can you explain that to the audience, please?
Sure. So rhetoric is largely, I mean, it's the study of language and persuasion. I like to think of it as how messages are communicated to audiences through texts. That's a really big kind of glossy definition. That's how I define it. And I tend to focus on that analysis of how messages are communicated to audiences through texts in digital contexts. So I tend to look at things like digital media, the internet more broadly, social media, digital gaming, stuff like that. I'm really interested in kind of how digital media kind of scrambles things in kind of traditional context of communication. My master's thesis was written about Wikipedia and how the discourse around Wikipedia tries to push users to go from just consumers of information to producers of information. My doctoral dissertation looked at how groups are formed and shaped by the design of digital games. So specifically, I looked at World of Warcraft and Farmville back in the early 2000s, back when those games were at the kind of height of their popularity. But largely, I mean, that's what my work looks at, is how do we look at digital media, how does it kind of shape and form the role of communication, and how can we understand how communication has changed by the introduction of digital things into our lives.
Because we communicate so often with digital transmission. Now, I'm just going to ask you your own preference, because you know the pitfalls of text, email, as forms, as opposed to verbal, in-person, face-to-face communication. So, what is lost and what is gained from the differences?
So, that's a really good question. I think in part there's a lot of context that's lost in digital settings, right? So you and I, as we're sitting here talking to each other, we can see our nonverbals, we can understand, kind of what's happening. You're nodding right now, which tells me you're buying into what I'm telling you. I wouldn't have that if we were having this exchange digitally. So if we were just sending messages back and forth, I wouldn't necessarily have that context to buy into. At the same time, it's been really interesting for me as someone who's studied digital media for the last 12 years here at Austin Peay. In the early days of the internet and internet studies, there was this sense that the internet was an anonymized place, so that there was a lot of this stuff that was lost in a digital connection. But now with the rise of social media and authentication and the sense that we have a set identity that we carry with us everywhere we go online, a lot of that's lost. So it's also interesting for me as someone who studied this to kind of see how the internet has become a much more kind of fixed place too. There's a writer I like to cite a lot when I do my research called Sherry Turkle, who wrote this book called Life on the Screen. And the idea was that in the early days of the internet, you could go online and you could be someone else. You could literally try a different identity on and be someone who you aren't in the real world. Today we call that catfishing. And it has a different connotation than what Sherry talked about back in the day. So.
Well, and there's some enjoyment, I'm sure, in the fact that you can establish a new persona. The fact that you can be seen by other people as somebody different. You can reestablish your identity.
Well, and one of the things that I think is really interesting too is taking that backwards. So it's also helped me to kind of look at this question about who we are in different identities we wear in the face-to-face or in the real world. So for example, I put on a certain persona when I come here to be a chairperson, but that is not necessarily the person I am when I'm just around with my family or out in the community or with my daughter. I mean, we have different identities we put on all throughout the day and throughout different contexts. It doesn't mean I'm a different person necessarily, but I'm certainly not enacting myself the same way that I would in all contexts. So, perhaps I'm a little less formal. I don't wear the vest all the time when I'm not on campus.
I would hope that you are always in the brand.
Always.
But here's another, just a side question for you. So you know the pitfalls of digital communication. So when you are texting, do you think, at least it's somewhere in your head, that you're thinking to yourself, my wife is going to know that I can't, that they're, if I use all caps, it may be saying a different message than regular communication.
Well, and I'm also very notorious when I'm texting with my wife to not proofread my things. So she also knows that my text messages will look like it's written by someone who is not anywhere near as educated as I actually am. But yeah, I mean, I am very much aware that what is lost in the move to digital, what is lost in the move away from kind of the physical, verbal communication that I think we as a species are evolved to engage with each other through. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's worse. It just means it's different, and being kind of cognizant of that difference, cognizant of how we navigate that difference is a key part of, I think, the work that I do.
So we talked a little bit before we actually went on the air about, how we get influenced and end up sometimes finding our subject areas.
Yes.
For instance, mine is sports broadcasting. You might identify a little bit more towards even gaming.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that a lot of people would want to know, how much of a gamer were you growing up,
Sure.
and have you continued?
I have. I remember when my parents borrowed my cousin's Apple II computer when I was, I think, 4 or 5, and so that sat in our house, and you were playing things like Conan the Barbarian on this Apple II computer, and these terrible white and pink and cyan graphics that were on the screen. But that kind of captured my imagination. When we were 5, we bought our first home personal computer, a Tandy 1000 TX.
Wow.
I know, I remember it to this day. It sat in my closet for a very long time up in Minnesota. But that was, again, a personal computer, and so I grew up kind of tinkering with that and playing games on that. So really, I've been playing games probably as long as I can remember being alive. Certainly I had a Nintendo growing up as a child, a Super Nintendo, a PlayStation. The thing we're joking about before we went on the air, I mean, again, part of why I wound up where I'm at, I was going to be a hard scientist, and I discovered that a video game, Final Fantasy VII, for those that are wondering, was more entertaining than doing my physics homework in high school. And so the hard sciences closed their door to me, but here I am today, studying video games and studying digital media. As a kid, I remember one of the things I used to love to do was just, in the early days of the internet, just get on the internet and just learn through digital media. One of the odd jobs that I had before I went back to grad school was I was a pharmacy technician, which is a dangerous place to be because it's a really boring job. You count by fives and you play with stickers all day long, and there's lots of downtime between each prescription, and so I would just go on the internet and read through Wikipedia in the early days of Wikipedia in the early 2000s, and just random things that you'd want to learn about, so superhero comic books, world history and stuff like that. But I remember being engaged in this digital environment where information was just kind of being freely traded, and just that was really fascinating to me, that here was a space where people were just sharing knowledge and sharing information. And there was that debate about how reputable Wikipedia was in those early days of the internet. But I wasn't necessarily interested in that, just as that this was a place where knowledge was being created and freely shared. To me, kind of struck a chord with all these early depictions of cyberspace and the internet and kind of science fiction that I was also reading as a kid too. So it was really fascinating to me, and that again leads me to where I am today. So
yeah, which is in my mind, we are educators. We are, no matter what roles we take as we continue on through the university. So I always like to find out how you think you've grown as a teacher.
Sure. I think I've learned to be much more humble as a teacher. So I think when I came here as a brand new faculty member, I kind of had this sense that I knew everything, and that I was, I was going to educate the people that were in my classes, that was the right way to do things. And very quickly, I kind of learned that it's important to kind of be humble and take information in from the people you are trying to teach. One of my first publications actually here as a faculty member actually came as a result of a discussion we were having in a class. We were talking about the 2016-2015 presidential election. One of my students mentioned then candidate Donald Trump as a candidate and the tactics he was using as a candidate, and jokingly yelled out, "Man, he's just trolling," like an internet troll might do in a discussion forum or in an online forum. Which led me then to think about kind of what does that behavior look like? How does that behavior play into it? And in what ways was that really an effective communication strategy for him as someone trying to disrupt the political system and the standard election system, I think, in 2016. So something I would have never thought of, but was brought to me by a student and really kind of opened my eyes to thinking about how we might might gain insight into the topics that we think we're experts in
Yeah.
by what someone else who's not an expert or who is trying to develop their own expertise brings to that same topic. So certainly wasn't something I was thinking about, but it brought it to my mind. And so just learning to be humble, learning to listen to students, learning to kind of take what the students are giving you and not reject that just because it doesn't meet what your education tells you it should be. That's been really interesting and really rewarding to me is kind of growing with my students, learning from my students.
Now, you have described yourself as being somewhat reluctant as a department chairperson.
Yes.
You came into the role, but I think you've grown certainly over that period of time. What do you see are now your things that you're working on that are becoming better? You're becoming better.
Sure. I think a couple things. I think one of the things I've tried to really do as a department chair was give our department some steady leadership. I came in as a chair after a couple of failed national searches for chair, and after a couple of interim candidates had served as chair, and so I've tried to really give the department some stable leadership and some direction. Right now, I'm trying to push our programs into new areas, trying to streamline what we offer our students so that we can offer our students more. And also, I'm trying to really work to build our university and department culture here on campus. One of the things I'm notorious for wearing this vest on campus, which people will joke with me that it's my tech bro vest because again, I guess I have some kind of tech bro ethos. But part of why I think stuff like this is important is that it helps to build an entity, build a brand, and let people know who we are. If you look at the Department of Communication, we are a department that is spread out geographically. We are spread out topically. I mean, we have faculty doing video production. We have faculty doing professional communication. We have faculty doing international communication, health communication, all these different areas. So how we can build that identity and build that space through things like branding, things like giving us a set identity, I think those things are very important. And it helps us to kind of establish ourselves as part of that. So that's also something I'm working on too. Building that culture, growing the department, growing our faculty, continuing to improve what we do, and trying to give our students the best we can give them.
Yeah, and I've noticed that you've been trying to provide our students with that sense of community. Yeah. And why is that important for them to feel that they have a safe place, a supportive place?
Yeah. Well, and I'm a big believer too. I mean, I went to the University of Minnesota as an undergraduate, and that was during what I like to call the cattle call days of higher education, where they would just admit as many students as they could possibly get through their doors onto campus. And if you persisted and graduated, that was great. But if you didn't, there were thousands of other students that were going to come in the door the next semester. And I'm not saying that was a good thing or a bad thing. That was just how higher education was done at a large state school in the late 90s and early 2000s. I'm very much aware that Austin Peay State University is a choice for our students. Higher education is a choice-driven industry, to the extent that it is an industry these days. And so making sure that students have something that keeps them here, that gives them a feeling like they belong someplace, that this is a place where they can feel like they're going to grow and learn and get something out of this experience, I think is really important. So that's something I'm really trying to do is give that sense of students, this is a place where you can be, this is a place where you can grow and learn, and where you can leave with a sense of other people who are doing the same things that you're doing. When I used to teach, I don't teach as much as I used to now that I'm chair, but when I used to teach, my favorite thing to do was just to put students in front of each other and make them talk to each other, just because I thought it built those connections. When I taught media literacy in my first semester here, it was kind of radical at the time, but now I think everyone's pretty much doing it, is I would make students teach the class. So one day a week, students would bring in media they were consuming, and they would have to present it to the other class, and we would just talk about it. And I wasn't in front of the room, I was literally sitting in the audience or sitting in the classroom with the other students. And we would just engage with that student about what they found passionate or what they loved, and we'd understand what messages that media was communicating and how we could make sense of it, and building that community, building that connection, helping those students to see how they were going to connect to each other and what that would mean for them and what they would do later in life.
Well, Dr. Barron, I appreciate that you have provided not only a great community for our students in communication, but also student experience and student opportunity along the way as well. And so I think it's very beneficial. I think our department is is rebounding after COVID.
Yes.
And
Yes, that's the goal.
And we are glad to have you as the chairperson for the department.
In my second tour, as I like to tell everyone in this military-themed town, I'm 6 months through my second tour. So
the fact that you re-enlisted is a big
yes,
thing.
yes, I did. I did. I went for my second tour. So there we go. So
well, thanks for being on the podcast.
well,
as
thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad we could have this time to talk.
And thanks to all of our viewers and listeners out there for joining us. We will continue to profile some of the outstanding professors we have here in the College of Arts and Letters at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.